All right, we're back with another episode of Distant Replay. Today we're talking about Barret Robbins, the former NFL player. Went on a bender during the Super Bowl, disappeared on his team, had some off-the-field issues as well. A really interesting story and a guy that's had some difficulties. We're going to tell you all about Barret Robbins coming up next.
This is Distant Replay.
Thanks for joining us on Distant Replay. I'm Ben George with Mike Noto. Got another show for you today. Mike, not really true crime. It's kind of dabbling in that area, but not necessarily a full-on true crime episode today, right?
It's sort of two-pronged. The issues that you probably know Barret Robbins for are not true crime related, but as he delved sort of deeper into some mental illnesses that he had, true crime became front and center in his life.
We're going to go through all that today on the show. Thanks for being here. Please hit subscribe before we get started. Helps us grow the YouTube channel if you're listening there. Thanks if you're listening on podcasts as well. Subscribe to wherever you listen, but we appreciate all the support. Leave a comment as well if you have any thoughts on this episode or any future true crimes you want us to dive into. All right, Mike, let's just get right into it. Barret Robbins, former NFL player. We're going to start on his backstory.
Yeah, it's just a very brief backstory. I know everyone doesn't like when we go into too much of a backstory, so they like us to get to the meat and potatoes, all right? But so real quick, he was drafted in the third round by the Raiders in the 95 draft. By the second season, he's the starter, and up until the 2002 season, where our story sort of begins, he's the starter, and he's all-pro first team. So we're talking like a top-level offensive lineman. That playoff run in 2002 included victories over both of our teams, Ben.
Right.
The Raiders beat the Jets in the divisional round and then the Titans in the AFC Championship to make it to the Super Bowl. So where our story begins, Ben, is we're the week of the Super Bowl in San Diego.
All right, so just coming off our recent episode on Jason Kelce and the documentary, we're focused again on another high-level offensive lineman, another center as well, but a little different trajectory. So let's hop into this season and kind of what all took place.
All right, so this is the Super Bowl. If you remember, for those out there who may not remember, it's when the Raiders played the Buccaneers.
Yep.
So you have the whole storyline with John Gruden leaving the Raiders, becoming the head coach of the Buccaneers. Bill Callahan, now the head coach of the Raiders. The Raiders have this prolific offense all year, right? Led by Rich Gannon, Jerry Rice, Tim Brown. I believe the running back was Charlie Garner, if you remember him.
Yeah.
And a central part of that team is Barret Robbins. I mean, this team is putting up prolific numbers all throughout the season. We're at Super Bowl week. The team has a team hotel, as you would expect. They don't stay with their families, okay? And the Friday night of Super Bowl week, his wife drops him off at the team hotel at night after they had gone out. So you figure sometime before 11 o'clock, which was the curfew for the team, at the team hotel. Well, fast forward to Saturday night, so 24 hours later, no one had seen Barret Robbins at all in that 24-hour span, and he shows up at the team hotel, completely disoriented. Now, a little bit of a backstory on his mental condition. He was diagnosed with depression when he was at TCU.
Okay.
He went to college at TCU, where he later became the third-round pick of the Raiders. He was diagnosed with depression, was on medication, and it's believed that when he gets back to the hotel, he had been off his medication for some time. No one knew it, and he ends up with people he still to this day can't name who they were. He ends up with people he doesn't know on a Friday night before the Super Bowl in Tijuana, Mexico, on like a complete bender. Drugs, alcohol, you name it.
Wild. I mean, you're talking about a time when these guys are super focused. This is the pinnacle of their career potentially, and reaching a point to where, you got a chance for glory, all-time glory on a really good team, and you're a big part of that, and to just disappear is crazy.
I mean, he's deep in the throes of whatever mentally is ailing him, and at this time, the team and his wife think it's depression. And we'll find out later, as I'm going to get into, it's a much more serious issue than that. But he thinks, like, he would talk later that he would think he was in Mexico, like, celebrating the fact that they had already won. That's how out of it he was.
Wow.
He resurfaces Saturday night, as I said, completely disoriented, was incoherent, didn't know where he was. Not like a typical, a guy is really high or really drunk type situation. We're talking like a next level kind of incident. Well, now the Raiders, Ben, they have this situation where they have an all-pro center who's very important to their game plan. Remember, they're about to play a Bucs defense that's anchored by Warren Sapp in the middle, right? Mm-hmm. So his position of center, not that it's not important anyway, but it's especially magnified because of the team they're playing. Every effort, Al Davis, as you might expect, wants Barret Robbins to play. Bill Callahan wants him to play. They make every effort to get him ready to play in the game. And it just comes to a point where they try to work him out the morning of the game, like in the parking lot of the hotel, because they're trying to keep this under wraps a little bit. Mm-hmm. And he's just way too disoriented to play.
Wow.
Okay? When he woke up on Sunday, Ben, his wife asked him, like, hey, basically trying to lead him, like, hey, it's Sunday. What do you have going on today?
Right.
And he basically said, oh, yeah, we have to go to church. So, like, he's completely out of it by now. He's scaring those close to him. The team is in a tough situation here because, they have a game to play. And the decision is made like he's not fit to play. Like he's too disoriented to play. Bill Callahan wants to send him back to Oakland, but they can't get a plane ticket for him because wherever he was, he had lost his ID and his wallet.
Jeez.
So the game happens, and every story you read about the game, I mean, they ended up losing. They end up getting trounced in this game, right? So it's very, very, very well documented. They lose 48-21. They get. If anything, I remember the score not even being indicative of how much of a blowout it actually was.
Right.
The guy who replaced him, a center named Adam True, did not perform well. So it just magnified this situation with Robbins from a football standpoint. But what I thought was interesting about this true crime story is the life of crime Robbins led after his football career was done. Or I shouldn't say after his football career was done, after the Super Bowl was complete.
Yeah, because you would think this story is one that would be kind of the headline, right? Hearing somebody that kind of goes through this. And I also wonder what would have been different had it been social media had been around. And this is, just a few years before the iPhone was released, but much easier to keep things under wrap at that point versus where we are today, where if something like this were to happen, if somebody disappears like this, somebody's going to see him somewhere and snap a picture. But the fact that this is one of the last probably true times you could go and disappear into Tijuana from San Diego for a Super Bowl weekend with all those people around and nobody know where you are.
You hit it on the head, Ben. This is one of the last Super Bowls where you could get away with doing something like this and not be on everyone's radar. In that situation, that may have helped him, actually,
Yeah.
He may have been somewhere, someone may have recognized it, alerted the Raiders, and maybe they could have nipped this situation in the bud before it got out of control.
Right.
So, again, we're at the point now where the Super Bowl is taking place. He enters rehab for 30 days at the Betty Ford Clinic. And this is where they diagnose him formally with bipolar disorder.
Okay.
So it's now graduated from we thought he had depression to he now has bipolar. And I guess from what I read, and I'm not a mental health expert, but in the early stages of depression, it can look very similar to bipolar. Okay. So I guess maybe this speculation that was the mistake that was made when he was diagnosed when he was in college. Well, what I had never realized is he played the next season for the Raiders. He was the starting center for the Raiders the next year. If you remember with that team, everything fell off a cliff very quickly after that Super Bowl run. Mm-hmm. They went 4-12. Now we're into the year 2004 in the Bay Area. And as we covered in one of the documentary reviews we did a while ago, the Bay Area, mid-2000s, is when the Balco scandal starts to percolate.
Yes, Balco, yep.
He's on the list remember the list of clients?
Yeah.
That was found in Victor Conti's office or in his lab? Mm-hmm. Well, he's on that list.
He wasn't not one of the more notable names. I mean, obviously an NFL starter, but I don't remember his name when you talk about all the people that were on that list. I don't remember him being on there, but interesting that he was tied into that.
Yeah, not that he's not a big name or a noteworthy name, I should say, but there were such massive names on that list. Mm-hmm. I mean, Barry Bonds, Marion Jones, the Olympic track star. So there was a lot of big names on that list. Like you said, I think he kind of got lost in the shuffle. He tested positive for the clear. Remember the clear?
Yep, clear in the
cream.
Yeah,
remember? Okay. Yeah, so that's what he tested positive for. Stands to reason that then in the summer of 2004, he failed a drug test. And at that point, he was released by the Raiders, and his football career came to an end. So now you have this the guy who just a season before, his first team All-Pro on a Super Bowl team. We're talking about less than 2 years later, he's out of the league with a positive drug test, and really sort of floundering. I mean, his marriage, as we see a lot with these true crime stories, Ben, when things really start to ramp up is when the career is done, there's no more structure. It also coincided with his marriage ending, and he's really on a downward spiral.
Yeah, it's very difficult.
And where things begin to slide in a big way, and where his path sort of changes from, okay, ex-football player dealing with mental health issues to crime, is where they begin to intersect is on Christmas Eve in 2004. He's arrested in the Bay Area at a place called the Francis Drake Hotel. So picture this. It's Christmas Eve. He's trying to go out for a drink, all right? He's going to a bar he's been at before. The bar is closed. There's a security guard there telling him, hey, look, you can't go in. The bar's closed. Mm-hmm. He was so kind of disoriented and already drunk at the time that he ends up punching out the security guard. Remember, we're talking about Barret Robbins. He's still a 350-pound in-shape offensive lineman, you know?
Yeah.
So he very destructive if he wants to be kind of situation. He gets arrested for battery, trespassing, and being drunk in public. After this, there's a bench warrant released on him. Instead of facing the bench warrant, he flees to South Florida. And, you know, to this point, we're talking about punching out a security guard. Well, now is when we really get into the serious stuff that he was involved with from a crime situation standpoint. He goes to South Florida to hang out with a friend and sort of enjoy the South Florida nightlife. Mm-hmm. Now, his family at this point has a pretty good idea what's going to come of this. And although his wife is divorced from him at the time, and a lot of his family is estranged from him, they still try to talk him out of going to hang out there because of just the social scene and how out of hand it can get. Mm-hmm. All right? So he's hanging out there in the beginning of January. The friend that he was there to meet and party with leaves, and Barret Robbins is now there alone. Okay? He's in Miami Beach, tries to break into a complex, maybe it sounds like a little, like maybe a little mini mall type place or buildings that are connected in a strip mall type situation where there's a pub, a gym, and a jewelry store owned by the same people. He tries to break into that area. We don't know why, but he tries to break into that establishment, and the owner calls police when he sees that he's broken in. Police respond. So 2 plainclothes police respond and 1 uniform officer respond. They find him in the stall in the women's bathroom. A fight breaks out. And as you might expect, you know, we're talking about Barret Robbins, again, a 350-pound, in shape, former football player, versus 3 cops. So it made it sound like in the report that I read and in the articles that I read that he pretty much was ragdolling these police.
Wow.
And it took them a while to sort of subdue him. And in the course of the scuffle, the police would say that Robbins tried to grab one of their guns, which led to him being shot twice in the torso.
Wow.
Yeah, and Robbins' attorney says, well, 2 of the 3 officers that responded were plainclothes. Mm-hmm. So my client thought he was getting robbed, which, I'm not sure how much I buy that. But again, the mental illness comes up where his lawyer says, he was in the middle of a manic episode and thought he was defending himself. Mm-hmm. Now, where this story sort of gets another sort of detail sort of gets thrown in here is earlier in the day, Coral Gables, where the University of Miami is?
Yeah.
So he ends up in Miami Beach, which is where the incident happened, where he got shot. Mm-hmm. Well, earlier in the day, he was in Coral Gables in a very affluent area called Sunset Island. And he was walking, someone called the cops and said there was a large man walking around disoriented in this neighborhood. Long story short, instead of the cops trying to help someone who was obviously disoriented and was going through some issues, they basically put him in the car, took him from this island, nice, ritzy area of Coral Gables, and just dropped him off like on the other side of the bridge, it made it sound like, and just sort of left him to his own devices. So there was a little bit of controversy with that amongst his family, like, hey, look, you could have gotten him help before now he's in Miami Beach later in the day fighting police and, getting shot.
Yeah.
Now, remember, he tried to grab a police officer's gun. So he's charged initially with 3 counts of attempted murder.
Jeez.
Yeah, which, as you might expect, are charges that really are going to levy a very serious jail sentence if he ends up being convicted of them.
Mm-hmm.
Now, remember, he's in April. Until April, he's in the hospital recovering. So this incident happened in mid-January with the cops, as I went through before. And now he's in the hospital until mid-April recovering. He faces the 3 counts of attempted murder. The prosecutor, after looking at all the evidence, okay, so the prosecutor looks at all the evidence and says, all right, we're going to knock down the charges from 3 counts of attempted murder to 3 counts of battery. 3 counts of battery on a police officer, resisting arrest, and criminal trespass, which could have still warranted a sentence of up to 30 years from prison for Robbins.
Right.
So this is still a very, very serious situation here. And he accepted a plea deal that just gave him 5 years of probation. Because what happened here, Ben, was in the subsequent months in between when he gets out of the hospital after being shot and when he is due in court on these charges of battery to the police officer and trespassing, he is violating his probation. So any drug tests he basically takes in between there, he's failing.
Right.
So he gets to the point where he's actually in jail for 11 months before this plea deal is even agreed to.
Things are just compounding.
So they're compounding, and it's the judge's decision with time served. Sorry, not the judge's decision, but a plea deal is reached where he gets 5 years of probation after he's already served 11 months. So now he's out, but in this time period, he keeps on failing drug tests, violating his probation, ending up either back in jail or in treatment facilities. His drug addiction and alcohol addiction is just continuing to spiral out of control.
Man.
Now, these series of incidents happened between 2010 and 2020. In 2010, he was found with crack cocaine in his car in the Dallas area. In 2011, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison for violating his probation. In March of 2011, he was then released in September of 2012. In August of 2016, he allegedly punched a mother and daughter in the face in Florida and was arrested on felony battery charges. Instead of prison this time, he ended up in a mental health facility.
Okay.
Then 4 years later, in November 2020, Robbins leaves a restaurant without paying for his meal and was arrested after he got into an altercation with a restaurant employee who tried to confront him.
Jeez.
And he threw a rock at their head.
Jeez.
So we have all these incidents way post career now. We're talking 15, 16 years after he stopped playing. We're talking, again, 15, 16 years after he's in that incident with the police in Miami. And I couldn't find anything very, very recent on Robbins, like post 2020. But just this life of crime that he led after retiring from football, I was never aware of. Basically, the last time I ever heard his name was that week of the Super Bowl when he went on that bender in Mexico and disappeared from the team.
It's just, you can tell the mental health struggles, I'm sure, are a huge part of these issues he dealt with. Not that it's an excuse for the behavior, but you can kind of see how those things just continued to plague him throughout his life, and all the trouble he dealt with, and just a tough story to hear. Hopefully, maybe there is an update, and hopefully he's doing better in his current form. But you got to think, playing football only compounds those things, right? If you already kind of have these mental health issues to begin with, football is absolutely not the sport you should be playing.
Yeah, and never mind. It's a tough situation, though, right? Because football can lead to some issues like you just mentioned, but football also probably gave him structure, kept him on the straight and narrow, kept him involved in something, maybe even kept him on his medication when he needed to be on his medication. And it's a double-edged sword, right? I mean, for him to be involved in the Balco scandal, incidents in 3 different states, Florida, Texas, and California, just a sad story, and someone who it doesn't seem like has ever gotten a handle on the mental issues that have plagued him.
Yeah, man, to get shot by police like that, I feel like that story should have been much bigger. I don't remember that at all. Again, this was, I guess, right as the iPhone was coming out, right before the iPhone, and which really, I look at the iPhone coming out as kind of the time when everything changed from a media perspective. But I don't remember that, again, might being like a huge story at the time. But that seems like something that should be top of Sports Center, front page news. A guy a year removed from the NFL as a starter on one of the best offensive teams and a team that was in the Super Bowl, getting shot by police and being charged with attempted murder. I don't remember any of that.
Yeah, attempted murder of 3 police officers. I mean, that's just not a crime you hear of often, especially involving someone as high profile as him. So you're right. I am surprised it wasn't on either of our radars. But look, the Raiders, I mean, it's been well documented where their franchise has gone since that week, that Super Bowl week. I mean, it's pretty much been a steady downhill plunge for them. I mean, they've had some blips here and there where they've made the playoffs, but they haven't had a team like that since.
Do you think it would have been any different had he not gone on that bender and he played? I mean, it's hard to justify him being a 3-score difference, but do you think that game would have been any different?
I don't think it would have been any different. Maybe it would have changed the score a little bit, maybe, but a center, I don't really – I mean, look, from a gambling standpoint, him being out didn't change the line at all, I'm guessing, right? And, you read articles, though, and that guy, Adam True, gets like absolutely blasted in articles that you read. Yeah. That it seemed like it was a pretty substantial trade down to have him playing in the game against a good defense, but I don't think it could be used as an excuse as to why they lost as bad as they did. And to the players' defense on the Raiders, I saw interviews with Tim Brown and Rich Gannon, who were obviously two central figures for that team, and they didn't blame the Barret Robbins missing the game for them losing by that much.
It's always remarkable to me when you go back through the stories of these teams and hear what's going on inside the locker room that you never know about. I mean, a story like this that's never on your radar, and this is what the team's dealing with. And you hear, I mean, you don't get these Benders and Tijuana stories very often, but you always hear about things that are happening off the field that you never get wind of that these teams deal with. It's always crazy to go back and think about that time period and what was happening, and this is just another example. So, Barret Robbins, Mike, thanks for taking us through his story and taking us back through his life and career. Hopefully, he can get things on the right track and corrected and enjoy, maybe hopefully some years before, anything happens to him even further. But interesting story to hear. If you have anything that you want us to talk about, anybody that you want us to go back through and document their story, true crime, sports related, let us know. We'll have more episodes coming up soon. And always hit subscribe on the YouTube channel, Mike, right? That's what we really need to help us continue to grow.
Yeah, it means a lot. I mean, please like and subscribe. We're going to have shorts coming out around this episode as well. So like and subscribe as much as you can. It helps the channel.
Absolutely. We thank you for your support. And thanks for listening to Distant Replay. For Mike Noto, I am Ben George. Talk to you next time.